what's the difference between consequence and subsequent? Do you mean subsequence or subsequent? So let's say consequence and subsequent. Can we say that? So a consequence is simply the result of some other thing. Maybe it's someone's actions. What happened because of someone's actions? Well, because you decided not to pick up your daughter from school because you were working late, then another parent had to bring your daughter home from school, and now she's upset at you and thinks you're a bad parent. That's the consequence. Now, that might be an emotional consequence, but it's still a consequence. Why would we use consequence instead of result? Well, often when we say result, we're focusing on some very clearly defined thing. We do a test, we get the results, right? Is it positive or negative? Medical test, blood test, right? Do I have this disease or not? It's negative. Oh, that's good. Negative means you don't have it. Oh, good, good. That's the result. Very clearly defined, right? Very clearly defined. It's a yes or it's a no. Or the number we got after doing all these tests is 11. Oh, 11. That's a result. So often when we talk about results, we're talking about exam scores, we're talking about yeses or nos, we're talking about specific numbers. Often. Not always, but often. Clear results. You could say, the result was 2. Not always like that, but that's the idea. That's how it's usually used. Consequences are harder to define. We wouldn't say, what is the consequence of the result? Or what is the consequence of the test? I don't know quite how to talk about it, but we're talking more about the impact of it, more broadly, in a way that we can't define quite as well. So when we're talking about the daughter's emotions because she didn't show up to school, the parent didn't show up to school to pick up her daughter to take her home, and another parent had to take her home, and she was worried for 20 minutes that her mother might have had something happen to her. She was stressed about it. And then she got home and she saw her mother was there and she felt a little angry. That sort of stuff is hard to define, hard to say, oh, it's this. So these sorts of things are more consequences. We focus on the general effects of things that happen, of people's actions, right? Could be things that happen. For example, what are the consequences of the coronavirus outbreak? Well, the consequences might be economic. Now, that's very hard to define. We could give specific numbers, and we could say that those specific numbers are consequences. But we could also talk about people's feelings, people's emotions, their changes in behavior, right? Those are also consequences. But it's broader than just saying the results. If we do a specific test, we get the results. Consequences in this case is more like effects, right? And sometimes impact. And the impact is when something happens. We talk about what is the thing that happens after the thing happens, right? What happens because of that thing? That's the impact. That can be the same as consequences as well in some cases, okay? One consequence, the consequence of this is when we want to say as clearly as we can one of those things. Now your daughter is angry at you because you didn't pick her up from school. That is the consequence of this. Okay, you can talk about it like that, but we often speak broadly in this way as consequences. We speak broadly about what happened using the uncountable form, or rather the plural form, but we don't talk about any specific one, usually. Okay, now what about subsequent? Now, usually we use the word subsequent, not subsequence. I've never used the word subsequence in my entire life, but subsequent just means the thing that happened next, okay? That doesn't have to be a consequence. It could just be the next thing that happened, right? So we could say, for example, the subsequent firing of Kathy resulted in a negative impact on morale across the company, okay? So subsequent means something happened, she made a mistake, then she was fired. Now, in this case, it is the result of her mistake that she's fired, but it doesn't have to be, just in this example. And then because of that, there are some other consequences. Maybe there's a negative effect on morale across the staff. Okay. So the thing happened, there was a mistake, and then the subsequent firing of this person had another effect or another consequence or other consequences generally, okay? It's the thing that happens next, the thing that happens next. Sometimes we use subsequently in a very formal way to say, and as a result of that, sometimes we say that. Because of that, sometimes. Subsequently, I feel that we should probably stay indoors for the rest of the year, right? Yeah, it's not really something that generally we use and we need to learn. But subsequent, the next thing that happened, is much more common. But consequence and consequences, even more common, very common. It sounds formal, but it's actually extremely useful, and anybody can use it, I think. Not that formal in all situations. You can use it generally to talk about the effects of a thing that happens. Hope that's clear. Okay, hope that makes sense. Don't forget to hit the like button, guys, if you haven't already, and don't forget to subscribe as well if you haven't already.